Hello, my name is Stephanie, a 35-year-old, and I've been married to Jerry for 3 years. We met through a relative who hoped a marriage would secure the future of my family's wealth. My sister Marilyn and I were the only heirs to our family's estate. Marilyn, vibrant and outgoing, contrasted sharply with my reserved nature. We lived with my father in the family home. After my mother's passing a few years ago, Jerry moved in. He initially seemed kind and attentive, especially to my father, which eased my integration into this new chapter of my life. However, a relative who had played matchmaker shared a concerning note just before our wedding. "Be careful with Jerry. He seems overly interested in financial matters." This warning lingered in my mind, though Jerry's behavior gave no immediate cause for alarm. As time passed, I noticed Jerry's casual inquiries into my father's finances during their relaxed conversations, but it didn't seem overly suspicious then. He also showed a peculiar interest in Marilyn, whose flamboyant style and dynamic personality were starkly different from mine. This difference did not escape Jerry, who once remarked, "Marilyn is quite different from you, Stephanie, isn't she?" His fascination with her made me uneasy, highlighting my insecurities about being plain and unremarkable. The turning point came when Jerry discovered I could not inherit my father's estate. His reaction was explosive and cruel. "You mean you can't inherit the property? I have no use for you anymore. We're getting divorced right now." His harsh words confirmed the warning I had been given. Shattered but not defeated, I found my resolve. Jerry remarried quickly, choosing none other than Marilyn as his new wife. However, I had the last laugh as events unfolded that neither Jerry nor Marilyn had anticipated. Their decision to overlook the deeper values of family and integrity for material gain was their undoing, and I ensured that my revenge was both sweet and just, finally closing this painful chapter of my life. If I had chosen not to marry, there would have been no one to inherit our family home. At first, I thought there was no reason to worry since I had a younger sister, Marilyn, who was not only beautiful but also seemed capable. However, I soon realized why our relatives were concerned about the future of our estate. Our father doted on Marilyn, supporting her through her education with little restraint. He sent her to college and even encouraged her to continue to community college after her graduation. Unlike others with clear academic or career goals, Marilyn seemed to attend these institutions more to avoid entering the workforce than to build a future. My mother, on the other hand, was practical and urged Marilyn to find a job right after her college graduation. Despite my mother's insistence, my father prevailed, allowing Marilyn to enroll in community college. Upon completion, Marilyn landed a job through one of my father's acquaintances, but her tenure was short-lived. She resigned after just 8 months. Her reason for leaving baffled me. "I can't showcase my talents at that company," she declared, as though she had mastered the intricacies of the job in such a brief period. Both my mother and I were stunned by her arrogance. Nevertheless, our father took her side once again and promptly found her another position. However, when my mother fell seriously ill and was hospitalized, Marilyn's pattern of avoiding long-term commitments continued. She visited our mother daily, which seemed caring at first, but it was clear she was mostly there to chat or scroll on her phone rather than provide any substantial assistance. I found myself managing the bulk of my mother's care needs, like changing her laundry, while Marilyn offered minimal help. Despite my mother enjoying Marilyn's company initially, her health declined sharply about a month into her hospital stay, eventually leading to a point where she could no longer speak. Tragically, within 3 weeks of her condition deteriorating, my mother passed away. The suddenness of her death left both my father and Marilyn too shaken to even prepare for her funeral, adding yet another layer of complexity to our family's trying times. After my mother passed away, I found myself handling all the funeral arrangements with some help from our relatives, and we managed to bid her farewell peacefully. Meanwhile, my sister, Marilyn, began a part-time job and decided to move out on her own. However, her earnings were not sufficient to cover her living expenses, so our father continued to support her financially, covering her rent and utilities. Previously, when my mother was alive, she was quite strict with Marilyn, and my father rarely gave her extra money. But after my mother's death, he began indulging her requests, giving her as much money as she asked for. I initially thought this arrangement was harmless, assuming both my father and sister were content. However, after I married and moved back into my parents' home with my husband, I discovered that my sister had also been asking my husband for money. He, enchanted by her charm, couldn't refuse her and even asked her to keep it a secret from me, fearing I might get jealous. It appeared Marilyn was comfortably living off the funds she received from both my father and my husband, attending her part-time job only when she felt like it. This unsustainable lifestyle came to a halt when my father fell ill and needed hospitalization. I was juggling my job and visits to the hospital to take care of him, but Marilyn was nowhere to be seen. Instead of helping, she started calling me, demanding money. "I've been getting money from Dad every month, so you need to keep giving it to me," she insisted over the phone, claiming her rent and utilities were still being paid from our father's account. Her tone was aggressive, and it was clear she felt entitled to this support regardless of our father's health or our family's circumstances. I was taken aback and furious when I first learned just how self-centered my sister had become, focusing solely on her own needs while our father lay ill in the hospital. I resisted the urge to end the call abruptly when she reached out, suspecting she was in some kind of trouble. Tentatively, I asked, "How much has Dad been giving you each month? You should consider getting a full-time job and managing with what you earn." Her response was gruff and unapologetic. "Stop nagging. I get $2,500 a month, plus the rent is separate, you know." Hearing her say this so nonchalantly shocked me. It made me realize that if I continued to supply her with this amount of money, she would never see the need to take her work life seriously. Initially, I didn't see a major issue with helping her financially, especially since I assumed that our father would soon recover. However, his condition deteriorated unexpectedly, prompting me to contact our relatives urgently. The doctors confirmed the severity of his situation, which left me deeply unsettled. During this stressful time, I yearned for my husband's support, but he seldom visited the hospital, citing his busy work schedule. When he did appear, his questions were insensitive and focused solely on the financial implications of our father's illness. "Inheritance must be huge, right? Since you and your sister are the only heirs, are you going to split it in half?" he asked casually. I was speechless and disheartened, unable to respond to my husband's crude interest in the inheritance. This moment was a stark realization for me, and I felt a profound sense of disgust. It dawned on me what our relatives had warned about. My husband's obsession with money was indeed real, and it tainted the way he viewed our family crisis. When I called my sister to inform her about our father's critical condition, her response was shockingly indifferent, focused solely on her finances. "More importantly, make sure you pay me every month. I can't live without that money," she said before abruptly ending the call. I was furious at her selfishness, but another concern quickly overshadowed my anger. A faint male voice I recognized in the background of the call, which left me with an uneasy feeling. About a month later, my father passed away. Heartbreakingly, neither my sister nor my husband was present during his final moments. Having already managed my mother's funeral, I knew the immense burden of organizing another funeral. Yet again, I found myself alone in the preparations, as neither my sister attended, nor did my husband offer any help. My husband briefly appeared at the funeral but quickly excused himself, claiming he had urgent work. A relative, the same one who had introduced me to my husband, noticed his early departure and asked, "Where's Jerry? It's strange for the host's husband to not be here, isn't it?" I managed only a wry smile in response, explaining, "He's busy with work, so he went home." The relative sighed at my answer, and I felt like sighing too, overwhelmed by the situation. Once the funeral was over, and I had a moment to myself, my husband approached me with a sleazy grin and asked, "So, how much did you inherit? Even if you split it, you must have gotten a considerable amount, right?" His blunt curiosity about the inheritance was as crass as the warnings I had received from relatives before our marriage. His unabashed greed was apparent, just as they had cautioned. My sister ended up with $50 million according to his guess, while he assumed I received a similar share. In truth, I hadn't even spoken to the lawyer yet. My husband's fixation on the money, ignoring the emotional weight of my father's passing, highlighted a disheartening realization about his priorities. Still reeling from the funeral, I watched as my husband gleefully discussed the inheritance. Instead of anger, a bitter amusement washed over me. When I nonchalantly mentioned that I wouldn't inherit any property, his reaction was swift and harsh. "What? You can't inherit anything? I don't need you anymore. We're getting a divorce," he declared. I was already one step ahead, feeling equally resolved. "Let's do it. You married me for my father's money anyway," I retorted, slapping the already prepared divorce papers on the table. He was taken aback, perhaps not fully expecting my readiness, but he signed them nonetheless. As he left our home, he threw a spiteful remark over his shoulder. "I'll divorce you, who gets zero, and remarry your sister Marilyn, who gets the $50 million. His words didn't sting. I was too focused on freeing myself from our sham of a marriage. True to his nature, he wasted no time in pursuing Marilyn, starting the process of marrying her the very next day. A few days later, he called me, still fixated on the money. "Do you still believe that story? When will you handle the inheritance? Hurry up and give Marilyn the $50 million, he demanded over the phone. I had anticipated his call. Keeping my tone strictly professional, I invited him. "Let's discuss this at my place next Sunday. I'm preparing for the procedure and will be waiting." Thinking he was about to secure the inheritance, he agreed, ending the call in a jubilant mood. On the scheduled weekend, my ex-husband and Marilyn arrived at my family home, surprised to find I had called a lawyer to the meeting. My ex, trying to reassure himself, muttered, "Of course you need a lawyer when inheriting a large sum of money." I was inwardly eager to see his reaction when he discovered the reality of the situation, completely different from what he had imagined. As the lawyer faced my ex-husband with a look of confusion, he began the meeting not with the inheritance details, but with a different agenda. "Before we delve into inheritance matters, there's an issue of a compensation claim against you, Jerry, on behalf of Stephanie," the lawyer stated. He then laid out several photographs that showed my ex-husband leaving my sister's house, all marked with dates. "These photos are evidence of infidelity before your divorce was finalized, which necessitates a compensation payment from you." This unexpected revelation caught my ex-husband off guard. The photos were the result of my swift action. Upon overhearing him discuss the inheritance with my sister over the phone, I immediately instructed the lawyer to gather proof of his infidelity. They might have assumed I was too preoccupied with my father's funeral to notice their meetings, but their regular rendezvous at her place had allowed me to collect ample evidence. The meeting's focus abruptly shifted from inheritance discussions to the compensation claim, leaving both my ex-husband and sister stunned. However, recovering quickly, my ex-husband scoffed. "Compensation is nothing compared to the $50 million I'm supposed to inherit. I'll pay it right away." His arrogance was palpable as he signed the compensation claim documents, confident in his forthcoming wealth. After he signed, I couldn't help but reveal the full extent of the situation. "Enjoy your life with my sister, who inherited nothing," I said. His smug demeanor faltered as I continued. "Since you've signed, I'll make sure you pay the compensation." At the mention of receiving zero from the inheritance, my sister let out a scream of disbelief. My ex-husband's face turned a bright red as he angrily blurted out, "There's no way the inheritance is zero. I won't let you take everything for yourself." The lawyer then began to clarify for the bewildered pair. Marilyn was indeed your late mother's stepdaughter, but since she was never legally adopted by your father, there is no formal parent-child relationship. Therefore, Marilyn is not eligible to inherit any part of your father's estate. The reality of their situation was now painfully clear, as legal facts overshadowed their assumptions and desires. As I spoke to my bewildered sister, I recounted our family history to clarify her misconceptions. When our parents remarried, you were only about a year old, so you probably don't remember, but I do. I was 8 years old and thrilled to suddenly have a sister, I explained. Our parents had each brought a young child into the marriage, and a mediator had thought it best for them to join as a family. My mother embraced me as her own, and my father adored Marilyn, perhaps going so far as to spoil her because she wasn't his biological daughter. He might have felt the need to compensate for the lack of a legal bond. Though they remarried, my mother, suspected by relatives of targeting my wealthy family's assets, never legally adopted Marilyn. This suspicion led our relatives to only consider me as a legitimate heir to my father's property, wary of entanglements that could arise otherwise. There were no children from their union, which in retrospect might have complicated matters further. Now, it was clear why my father continued to financially support Marilyn into adulthood. Without a legal adoption, he couldn't leave her his inheritance. Likewise, I never legally adopted my mother, so we weren't officially parent and child either. However, this technicality never impacted our relationship. It seemed my parents had never explained to Marilyn that they were both remarried, and she only learned the truth today. My ex-husband, on the other hand, grasped the situation instantly, his face shifting from bright red to a pale shade of blue. He had not only failed to secure the inheritance he had hoped for from Marilyn, but had also inadvertently committed himself to paying compensation. With a stunned expression, my ex-husband asked me, "Was what you said about Marilyn getting $50 million and me getting nothing a lie?" I struggled to hold back my laughter before responding, "Of course it's a lie. It was to get back at you for cheating on me. Besides, there's no way our family's estate was ever worth $50 million. Even my wealthy father didn't have that much to leave behind." His realization that he had been deceived not just by the non-existent inheritance, but also by his own misconceptions and greed marked a turning point in our dealings. My satisfaction wasn't just in seeing his plans thwarted, but in clearing up the long-standing family misconceptions that had so deeply affected us all. Suddenly, my sister, who had been quiet throughout the discussion, erupted in panic. "I've been counting on Dad's inheritance and have done a lot of shopping. What will happen to the money Dad used to pay me? Will Stephanie cover it?" she exclaimed. I responded calmly to my agitated sister, "You have a reliable husband now, don't you? Let Jerry support you." Turning to her husband, she saw only his pale face as he shook his head. "I've also been spending, expecting the inheritance, so I can't afford it. Besides, I have to pay compensation now, so I'm financially stretched," he admitted. After his confession, my ex-husband suddenly shifted his tone and began to apologize profusely. "Stephanie, I'm sorry, it was all my fault. Can you forgive me and let's start over?" His sudden plea for forgiveness seemed almost comical given his earlier confidence. The lawyer, who had been silently observing the scene, couldn't help but laugh as he prepared to leave. The arrogance my ex-husband had shown upon arrival had completely vanished, replaced by desperate apologies. After the meeting, both my ex-husband and sister left the house dejectedly. It wasn't long before they divorced. My ex-husband, who had remarried Marilyn with the intention of inheriting a fortune, lost interest in her once the financial benefits were no longer a prospect. He muttered to himself about his inability to support her, especially with the compensation payments to me draining his finances. The compensation was set to be paid in installments directly from his monthly salary, since he had no assets. The lawyer reassured me that this arrangement would ensure I received every penny owed. As for my sister, without our father's financial support, she was forced to work part-time every day. Yet, she couldn't manage her debts and eventually filed for personal bankruptcy. She even lost her condominium, and soon after disappeared, leaving no trace of her whereabouts. Our father's financial indulgence had unfortunately left her ill-prepared for the realities of financial responsibility. After all that had transpired, I chose to live alone in the family home. Some relatives suggested introducing me to potential suitors, but I declined. Burned by my past experience, I decided that if I were to consider marriage again, I would find someone on my terms, someone distinctly different from my ex-husband. This time, my choice would be mine alone, driven by genuine connection rather than financial expectations or familial pressures.